Welcome to the WSO Weekly Wrapup, where I talk with my team about the 5 most trending discussions in the Wall Street Oasis community. Enjoy. All right, everybody. Sorry about the week off last week. It is April 20th. It is almost 10 a.m. Pacific. Matt, what's going on today for the hot topics in the forums?
Hot topics, not a shocker here, Pat. We have another round of layoffs happening this week. Barclays is what we're hearing so far, about 100 layoffs in their investment banking division. So it looks like negative news is continuing even with the week off. We thought things maybe might change in a few weeks, but looks like steady as she goes. It's actually interesting, Pat. I don't know if you remember this. Barclays did do some layoffs even last year in 2022. So seeing a further deepening of cuts there is a little bit worrisome. But
this was just for IB. This was just for IB, and we know deal flow has been very, very low compared to last year, and even lower than obviously 2021 was a blowout year. 2022 was a massive drop, and 2023 has been even weaker from what we were seeing. But 100 people getting laid off in the IB division alone is scary for those out there. We haven't seen too much chatter about it on the forums. A few people have been like, hey, what have you heard? But not too many people coming out talking about geography yet. If we do hear more about that, we'll post an update here on the show notes. But
yeah, I'm sure it'll eventually come to the forums. It always does. So we'll keep an eye out there and an update next week. But let's get into a few of the cool topics that we saw this week. So another thing around careers, breaking into investment banking specifically, we had someone in the threads talking about what are the best ways to stand out as a rising high school student. It was funny, some of the angles we saw from replies in the threads there. People taking it a little bit offensively, like, hey, you're way too young to even be thinking about this. Live your life. Then you have alternatively some people thinking, that's great. You're being a little bit proactive and providing some tips. So Pat, what do you think? What's the best ways if a high school student should even be thinking about this? And giving it that much effort, what do you think are the best ways that they can do some things to stand out?
If this is truly a rising high school senior, are we talking about a middle schooler here, like an 8th grader? Is that?
I'd have to assume. Let's assume senior for this.
Okay, so like if it's a senior and like they already have their college job offer, I think it would be great to start senior year or the senior summer. Obviously, enjoy your life. Number one, you're gonna have plenty of time once you get to college. But like I think given how early recruiting timelines are, if you can start senior summer or senior year, even if you're like your course load's light, you're already into a good school, why not start kind of learning more about the industry and just trying to figure out more about like financial modeling and that stuff. It's just going to give you that much more of an advantage, especially since timelines have moved up to like, for diversity recruiting up to freshman year, for accelerated recruiting or not even accelerated, for normal recruiting for junior summer internships, which is the path of least resistance to get these jobs, is now in sophomore year. So like you really don't have that much time to meet people. So if you're like a senior in high school, it's kind of like the equivalent of what being a freshman was a few years ago. So doesn't mean you want to be like necessarily getting on a bunch of like networking calls as a high schooler, because people will probably like laugh.
Yeah, that was going to be my question there, like to clarify on that. But do you think these people or like a high schooler should be focusing more on like internal development, personal development versus like the networking, right? Because an initial idea that I had that just came to my head was, maybe you speak with your parents or even just family, friends, see if any of their parents are in a finance-based role where you could kind of get some tangible experience. I don't think it should be paid, because realistically, 12th grade, you're 17 years old, you're not going to be providing that much value. But I think more of like an unpaid internship could be helpful if you have someone in your network like that.
Yeah,
but
to be fair, we've had high schoolers in our finance research analyst internship. We've had seniors doing a great job there. So like, that's like an example of an internship that can go on the resume and just start out right away, kind of ahead of the game in terms of giving you a slight leg up and branding you as a finance person. Now, I'd be a little nervous if you're already saying like investment banking or bust, like as a high schooler, in the sense of like, do you really understand what the job entails? I had a call with somebody yesterday about like work-life balance and just like the difference between like hearing about 80-hour work weeks and 90-hour work weeks and then actually living it is very different. And it's different in the sense of like, as a high schooler, if you go to like a top high school and are working and doing 6-7 hours of homework a night, it's still very different from being in the office and being in the real world versus like, oh, I had sports and then I had this. Like you're moving around a lot more versus like you're staring at a screen for, that long. It's different, and you're like getting sleep deprived. It's actually a lot of people hit their breaking point in their first year, and they're like, oh, but you're getting paid so much. I'm like, yeah, but on an hourly basis, are you really getting paid that much? And so that's what I would caution. Is like,
it's funny because I think the career in itself, don't get me wrong, I obviously think it's a very nice career to have, but I do think it maybe gets a little bit glamorized from the movies that come out around that around the career. So like your Wolf of Wall Streets that really got a lot of young people chomping at the bit, wanting to get into investment banking or finance specifically, and it's not going to be that glamorous. You got to think of the times where you're missing that party on a Friday or a Saturday. Your girlfriend, you got to cancel plans on her. It's a stressful job.
yeah,
And I think the difference from schooling specifically to then actually being on the job is really like that support net that you don't even realize is there. So for instance, especially in high school, you do have a lot of resources and support built around you that you may not even see, even if you think you're killing it and you're spending that 7-8 hours every night doing homework and you're getting 95 plus score. There is still a lot of support around you that you don't even realize. But when you're in like an investment banking and you're in that bullpen, you get that support, but it is very much still going to be that sink or swim. There's a lot of money involved. People's careers are involved. People are relying on you, so it's definitely going to be much more cutthroat. And that's where I think the stress adds up. So it's to think that you were able to manage it when you were 17 years old, and now when you're 25, 26, without even going through it. I think you got to obviously, like you said, don't be Ivy or bust. Keep your options open.
There's a really great thread on the forums right now, actually, about a kid who just had his offer pulled right before they're starting, like 2 months before starting. It was a guy in New York at a middle market, I think. I don't know the firm. There was a lot of people speculating who was it? Was it, was it Blair? Was it Stifel? Who was it? And we don't know that answer. And I think people should just I don't know. They wanted him to kind of shame the firm, but I don't think that's a good idea because it could potentially call out who it was and burn bridges. But I think the more interesting part where there were some veteran members coming in there and talking about how your career is a very winding path. Like this is for an early speed bump, but just one of many speed bumps that'll come. And he talked about his son who ended up thinking he wanted to do banking and ended up actually getting an internship in sales, and is now just crushing it there several years later, as one of the top, performers and earning, loving the company, loving the job, and kind of building skill sets, and has a path towards kind of growth there.
Yeah. And that's one thing. And before we pivot to the next topic, I just wanted to chime in, 'cause for me, at least it hits home where for me, I went to business school, as I never saw myself working in sales. If you were to ask me that, especially in high school or even first, second year, I was always it was either S&T or IB. That's where, my interests initially lied. But like you said, that, that path and that winding career, it's going to bring you into a certain spot that you're not really expecting. What I've gotten more, what I'm more receptive up to now is understanding the idea of skills are truly transferable. I know when you're younger, you hear that. And for at least me, it was just in through one ear, out through the other. But now I'm actually seeing how skills do transfer over roles. So I think, I do value that personal development time now way more than I used to. So if there's any advice for these high schoolers, these kids that are still really young in college, university, don't just overlook the personal development. Those skills do transfer, even if you think it does or not. Corporate roles, you need to have a certain skill trait, whether it's in investment banking, whether you're in FP&A, back office, there is certain skills to a corporate role that you need to learn, and that's going to be transferable across the board. And at the end of the day, you can make money doing a lot of things. Don't think it's IB or bust to make a lot of money. If you like something, you dedicate yourself to it, you'll make money in whatever role you end up doing. But on to the next topic there, guys. Another interesting one, all about careers in itself. In the forum, someone asking about leaving a job off of your resume, and then the discussion kind of turned, what is the actual idea of a resume? Is it simply just a highlight reel, or is it more of a background check? And I found that interesting way to think about it, because obviously then that poses the question: should you be leaving a job off your resume, maybe if it wasn't a good experience, or maybe not a good experience to be showcasing to the role you're looking to get into now? So what do you think about that, Pat? Should people be leaving jobs off the resume? Should just be something
absolutely.
you thought about? What do you think?
It's a highlight reel. The goal of the resume is just get the interview.
But then how do you manage though not having a gap, right? You're gonna, or is it you manage it by preparing a response because you know that question is going to come up.
You know that question's coming. Yeah, I think that'll be the first thing asked on any sort of interview. Of course, if you can minimize the gap, it's better by making it look like you know, having a different experience maybe around a project that you did in those months, or hopefully it's not like several year gap. If it's a several year gap, it could, you know, it's something around health or something around other stuff. Like you're just going to have to share as much as you can to kind of get the interviewer comfortable. There's still a lot of, I think, stigma around certain health issues, around mental health, especially. So if like it's something around there, I would be less forthcoming about it, because then there's going to be judgment, unfortunately, around that. But if there's other stuff, like if it's, you know, death in the family, if it's because of something else, if it's you know, you had to move because you had to be closer to family. I've heard that a lot. I think that's really well understood. Or if there's something along like layoffs, like there's a ton of layoffs going right now, and if it's outside your control and then there's like a 6-month gap there, that's great. Now, what I'd say is you want to minimize that gap as much as possible. So in the event that you're laid off or fired or whatnot, you should try to work something out as part of the severance with that company that allows you to either stay on payroll at a lower rate or whatever, so that you can be searching for the job under the guise of still working for your previous firm for as long as possible. That's a big deal, because let's say you're given like a 2-month head start where they're like, hey, but we'll keep you on payroll. Let's say it's April. Let's say you get fired today, April 20th, but they're like, hey, we'll keep you on through June. You now have like a good, 10 weeks to kind of start your conversations. You can be having those conversations from a relative position of strength, and not being like, I got fired. You can just be like, I'm exploring my opportunities, so it doesn't look as bad. And you're probably going to land a lot more interviews versus like, yeah, I was part of the layoffs and blah, blah, blah. It can be more like, hey, I things are obviously tougher here. There's not a lot of deal flow. I'm looking to get in a better seat, And I think that allows you to potentially lateral. It gives your odds of lateraling to a better shop.
Well, playing a little devil's advocate here, I mean, I understand the idea of resume being a highlight reel, but is there any negativity? Like, why would it be negative if you showcase an experience? And of course, if you did a terrible job in that role, then I mean, yes, you don't want to be discussing that experience. But if there was a different reason why you don't want to be showcasing that on your resume, I would think maybe showing that you maybe had a time where there was a struggle or something might be a good thing if you have a good story to tell to it. Because I think it'd be foolish to think, you hire someone that they're going to be a rock star from the first day you hire them to the whenever they leave the organization 24/7. The likelihood that's not going to happen. I think there's always going to be that cyclical nature, even within the role of just your performance or overall happiness in the role. So I think kind of showcasing that could be a nice angle if you have a good story to tell and how you alleviated or overcame some of those challenges and why it made it a poor experience, or what you at least learned from that. I see could be helpful in an interview.
Yeah,
but
it could. You just
I guess on the flip side,
careful.
I guess on the flip side, it's so competitive now where you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot. So I see both. It's just.
I say the only reason you'd leave, I mean, you put it in there if you can answer yes to these questions. Number one, is it is it like relevant to the job you're applying to? Are there good projects or outcomes you can speak to? Like, are your bullets strong for that specific experience? Like, or was it complete bullshit? You did nothing. You learned nothing. Like if it's like you learned very little, you did very little, and they just ended up cutting you, and so that leads like a 6-month gap on your resume, I almost rather have that 6-month gap that hopefully you can kind of massage into a 4-month gap. And then, and I'd rather have that than like having to talk about it. And you could mention it in the interview, be like, what happened here? Be like, I did work for a blah, blah, blah company for a while. Unfortunately, like I was, my impression of what the role was and what the firm was going in didn't match up with reality. And I ended up leaving there to go to my next role, which was which was a great experience, and blah, 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 blah. And so, not talking overly negative about it, keeping it positive and keeping it focused on the role that you're applying for and how you think that your previous experiences will lead you to be a great hire for that role.
Makes sense.
I think is best practice. But like, Yeah.
Yeah, I guess if there's any if there's any job, like, and even if this thread was referring to, a job on your resume and you could tell it's kind of like fluff, because I saw some people here talking about like being ethical, right, in terms of tailoring your resume. If of course if it's like a role that's like fluff, and I think it's very easy to see that for another reader, then yes, I think you avoid that, have that gap, and maybe talk about some personal development things. At the end of the day, these people hiring are doing hundreds of interviews a month. They've been probably in seat for a handful of years now. So it's pretty easy to cut through and see BS versus not BS. So, if you think you're going to try to outsmart someone,
I've seen so many bullshit bullets where it's
right. So then you're better off probably leaving it off and going the angle of like, whatever, maybe you took certain courses, some financial modeling courses.
Some people go the other way. They try to jam in every single
and that's what I'm saying.
One page, or they go.
People are going to see right through that, right? Because if you're confident, you should be able to.
Yeah. My point is, it's not even that. Like, some people go after a few years of work, they'll like literally it's like they try to put every single award, every single thing.
Stretch the margins.
Since they were kindergartners, they put like 6-point font. They jam like all this stuff in there. I'm like, that's a disaster. That shows you don't have the ability to present yourself and know what's actually attractive to the employer. That's just as much of a disaster as having an empty resume.
Because that's the angle of how an interviewer would look at it, right? Like, you don't do a good job at taking all this data, and putting them concisely into a manageable, readable format, right? Which is essentially what you'd be doing when you put together pitch decks, right? Like, the idea you have all this data, get it to something that's digestible and easy to read for investors or your clients to consider. So
that's where our resume review service comes in really well, because it allows people to give you honest feedback. They're not going to bullshit you. They're in the industry. They're going to be like, why is this bullet 4 lines long? Like, what are you doing? Like, that's really like a no-no. Why do you have eight bullets on this experience? Where's your transaction experience? Okay, you don't have transaction experience, but you're a consultant. Okay, let's actually make that look like transaction experience, like your engagement.
That's the thing. Or making it. I think there's certain things that you should be doing where you have to be quantifying certain things on your resume. Like, what was your impact? Can't just be analyzed XYZ and compiled XYZ. It's as a result of analyzing XYZ, this was the impact to the business, right?
Right.
Landed 200 million in origination or whatever that may look like. But I think that's the important part, where that's where you get it out from the fluff. Yep. So if you have experiences, it's fine if you're trying to pad it, but there needs to be some sort of tangible value that you provided in that role. It can't just, like I said, analyze XYZ folders. There needs to be, this is the result.
9 out of 10 resumes don't quantify enough. I've very rarely seen. There's some where I'm like, well, okay, you took it a little bit too far, but it's rare. Usually it's too little. And so people say, I worked on this types of projects. How many? Like, in how many clients did you serve? Like, in what capacity, and what are the numbers? So, man, lots of improvements out there. People assume their answers are great in interviews, like their behavioral answers, and people assume their resumes are dialed in, when most of the time they're not.
It's I guess ego for you, but best to like they always say, leave the ego at the door. Or
no, they go to the career centers, and the career centers give them the thumbs up so they feel good about themselves, and the career centers aren't actually working in the industry and have no clue.
Exactly. Yeah. And actually, a lot of times I have seen, because I was helping out with the mentor and the resume stuff when I initially started off 4 years ago. But some of these people actually do the hiring for their firms, right? Or they're at least involved in the process. A lot of times when you do go through investment banking interviews, you're going to meet with the HR staff, of course, but that's sometimes even just like preliminary interviews. Second round, third rounds are usually with VPs, associates. My buddy just did it about a month or two ago, and he met with like 3 associates that were going to be working under him. They just want, because he was coming in the VP role. So you're even meeting like with people that you're going to be their boss. They wanted to see the type of person you are naturally. And then alternatively, he was meeting with directors and MDs as well. So at the end of the day, these are the ones that are actually doing the interviews a lot of times. So the insight that they're providing is going to be much more beneficial than something from a career center. But at the end of the day, I think we both agree resumes are a highlight reel. Make sure you're just putting the most relevant stuff, quantify it. And if you do need to have a gap, by all means, that's great. Just try to spin it in a way that you're either developing personally, or there's a positive reason for that gap. But
we do have a free resume template. We'll link it in the show notes for those of you that want to kind of see what it should look like. Design.
Check it out, guys. It's free.
Yeah.
Best thing in life, free. FREE. So take advantage, guys. But it was a great call today, Pat. Great meeting. Let's reconnect in a week, and we'll do it all over again and discuss.
And Nabil will be back. Nabil will be back from his vacation.
Yeah, so we'll be a 3-man team versus 2-man. But until then, guys, all the best.
And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, Patrick at wallstreetoasis.com. Until next time.